All right, we are live. All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another live with me, Ben Rojan and Madison. Thanks so much for joining us, Madison.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I was really wanting to kind of dig in because I had been reading some of your articles, and I was like, okay, this I think you've got a lot of great perspectives on analytical engineering and just kind of maybe where some of that's going, and you have some preferences, I think. So, I just want to talk to you and see kind of what perspectives you had. Is there anything that you usually use to describe kind of your background in terms of data and work?
Yeah, so I was a mathematical finance major in college, and I did that in marketing and then some like random business analytics certificates. And I discovered data science while actually working at a fashion company. And I kind of was interested and intrigued, and I kind of realized, oh, I actually want to do this with my career. So I didn't want to change majors or go to school for another year. So I stuck it out with the mathematical finance and kind of just attended different events I was outside of New York City. So I took advantage and taught myself basically different engineering concepts, Python. And then I was actually at a hackathon sponsored by Capital One.
Mm,
They found me that way, and they were like, hey, we have this coding boot camp, we think you'd be a great fit. We typically look for people with like more analytical backgrounds but not computer science backgrounds, so
mm,
people that have that kind of mindset but didn't major in computer science. So I interviewed with them. I was accepted into their coding boot camp, and then after doing that for 6 months, it was like a general assembly program.
mm.
I worked for Capital One as a data engineer for 2 years, and then as an analytics engineer now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I I usually also like to ask, like, when you're not in the data world, what do you do outside of data?
Yeah, I have a lot of different hobbies. I'm very passionate about health and wellness, so a lot of my time outside of work revolves around that. So I really enjoy weightlifting, yoga, running, cooking. I do a lot of reading, hanging out with my dogs. I'm big on hiking, so they always come hiking with me. I'm usually in Arizona. I'm in New Jersey now, but yeah, I also do sewing too, which usually there's a sewing machine in the background, but I'm currently at my parents' house. People always ask me about that.
That's funny. Like, I'm also currently at my parents' house, so that's funny. Um, I'm actually in Seattle. It's a Seattle data guy for once. Do you ever get lost in the hikes in Arizona? I was sometimes get lost when you're like, is this a riverbed? Is this a trail?
I luckily haven't.
That's nice.
Yeah, I usually follow all trails that kind of
Ah,
leads me
yeah, okay.
correctly.
All right. Well, just diving into the topic, in terms of like analytics engineer, like how do you kind of define that title?
Yeah, so I think the analytics engineer really owns the modern data stack, and they're in charge from really moving data from point A to point B, but also transforming it and making sure that the data stays high quality in the process. So rather than just, I guess, focusing on the moving part, you're actually looking at the actual data, which I think is a little bit different from a data engineer.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Um, I guess like what like you kind of described it earlier, like in terms of like how you got there. Is there a specific reason you kind of stuck with it? Like I feel like you kind of said how you got there, but maybe not why you were maybe attracted to it.
Yeah, so when I was working for Capital One for the 2 years, I kind of knew that data engineering wasn't completely for me. I've always been like super business minded, and that's kind of why I went to business school and majored in that in the first place, because I didn't think I wanted to do something completely technical. And as a data engineer, I wasn't having as much access to the business side of things that I
Mm,
really wanted. And I really wanted more creativity and to have a say in why we were doing certain things. So I tried to transfer to a data analyst within Capital One, and I kind of realized that that skill set wasn't exactly for me and my
Mm.
background. Because you think that they're related and that one can do the other, but I definitely don't think that is the case. And I have a lot more respect for data analysts now that I work directly with one all the time. So I was looking for jobs and I just wasn't having any luck with the data analyst roles that I was applying to. And that's kind of when I discovered the analytics engineer. And just while scrolling on LinkedIn, I was like, oh, this actually seems like a great mix between what I'm looking for with interacting with the business and having more creativity, but also with the skills that I already possess.
Yeah. I think that's a good point though in terms of like data analysts, right? Like it's maybe it doesn't feel as technical
Hmm.
to some people, but it definitely like has this other aspect of like very connected to the business and like how you figure out what's valuable and how to drive value in that role. I think is like it's a very unique thing and it's very different. And it, you know, I also have a lot of respect for people who know how to like drive those conversations and know where to look for in terms of data. So
Yeah,
that
it's
makes a lot of
definitely
sense.
hard and underrated. I think a lot of times people look at the analyst role almost as a level down, but that's definitely not the case. It's definitely a whole different way of thinking and developing your skills.
Yeah, and just a whole different way of adding value. So I think that's what's always important, not to forget. In
Yeah,
terms of like, oh, sorry.
I know, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say in terms of like realities of like the work of an analytics engineer, just because you know because it's a new title, there's probably a little more interest. Are there parts you feel that are less glamorous that maybe people feel like oh you know analytics engineer it's really cool, but do you feel like there's some realities that maybe are a little less exciting, a little less glamorous?
Yeah, I think honestly most of it is not very glamorous at all. I think the DBT and the actual modeling part is like the most fun part about it, but a lot of the times like you're setting up different tools, trying to get them to integrate in your stack, but for the most part I think it's validation and documentation that's probably like the most unglamorous. There's a lot of validation that goes into every single part of what you're doing and just like really getting into the nitty gritty of the data, which sometimes it's fun, but other times you discover things that you probably wish you didn't discover because it just causes like a trickle down effect of all these problems. And then the documentation part is something I write about a lot because I think it's super necessary and a lot of teams don't prioritize it. But it's not the most fun thing in the world. You're hunting down different people, trying to figure out what certain columns mean and how they're used. And we just did like a whole data catalog initiative, and that took up like a whole month of my time just documenting data that we've never taken the chance to document before.
Yeah. What did you guys end up using for your data catalog?
We actually didn't go with any tool. We just did it, a lot of it manually. So hopefully, eventually, we'll have the budget to implement like an automated tool. But it was a lot of manual ERD diagrams, which isn't fun.
Yeah, it can definitely be a lot of work to like kind of go back. And do you feel like you set it up in such a way, like probably through all your infrastructure development, that it was at least easy for people to kind of go through quickly?
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be good for us to have that initial documentation that was never there. Like documenting your internal database is one thing, but then there's also the documentation that goes with like all of your data models and all of the external sources, which I think that's definitely easier to navigate because of DBT. DBT makes
Mm,
it really easy to like deploy documentation in an easy to read way. So
yeah. Besides DBT, because I think one of the first articles I came across with you was an article on Prefect. Do you have any other tools you've really enjoyed using in 2022, or maybe you're looking forward to using in the future?
yeah, there's this one tool that I've been talking about a lot recently called RE Data. They're a free DBT package. They really helped me solve a very specific use case that we had regarding our data volume. I was
Mm,
looking for a way to track that and alert us of when our volume in some of our tables dramatically decreased. And
Mm,
surprisingly, like I couldn't find a good solution on Snowflake or Fivetran or even DBT.
mm,
And they had a package that was able to do that. And they also have like a lot of cool macros that allow you to easily clean your data. So it just
mm.
saves you a lot of time, especially if you're a small team.
Yeah, I feel like I might actually be part of Redata's Slack. They do data quality, right? Mostly and data like alerting, if I recall.
Yep.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
open source.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Did you look at any of the other ones? I think it's like Great Expectations and Soda SQL might also be in that similar space. Did they kind of do similar things? I'm more just curious.
Yeah, I've looked at DBT's Great Expectations, or I don't know if they just have an expectations package. I'm using that one as well.
Mm,
I haven't used it a lot yet, but I'm planning on implementing it. And they have, again, like a lot of different use cases that you can use them for. I feel like they all offer very similar things, but then each one also has something really different that they can offer. Like RE Data has the data volume, which I find super helpful that I don't think any of the other ones have, at least not that I've seen.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if I don't think I've used that specific functionality. So, but that sounds helpful in terms of being able to track if like I would almost expect the opposite, which is like seeing like double the amount of data and being like, why is there
Mhm.
suddenly double the amount of data?
Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah, we had an
Um,
issue where one of our like tokens kept expiring and we didn't realize it. So that was really helpful with detecting that issue.
yeah, yeah. Um, in terms of like because you've kind of I think interviewed across a various set of roles, do you have any interview tips for people, whether it's like more data engineer or analytics engineer, in terms of what they should do to prepare?
Yeah, I definitely think one of the most important things, at least with technical interviews, is just talking out your thought process. I feel like that's very underrated in the interview process. Instead of like just faking it till you make it, because the interview will totally see right through that, actually admit that you don't know something and talk through your thought process on a problem. And that can really take you far. I know I had one interview where I completely didn't really know what I was doing. It was a Python interview and it was like a pretty complex algorithm problem. And I never really took any computer science courses, so it's not my strong suit.
Mm,
And I was solving it in like a super choppy way that I know was not optimal at all. But I was talking through why I was doing that and the functions that I was using. And I actually ended up getting another interview and then eventually a job offer, which kind of shocked me because I thought I totally bombed the interview. But just talking through my thought process, I think they really appreciated that. And it shows that, oh, this person at least has that mindset where they can think through a problem and they're not going to just like give up and hit a wall, and they can also accept help from someone else.
yeah, I think it's always like I mean, I've done way too many interviews, so whenever like well, more giving interviews, haven't had to recently do any recently, but I think it's always great when someone like pre-tells you what they're gonna do. Like it's like this is my general plan because it always like can save you from like going down the wrong path, and it's like,
Yeah.
is that exactly what you want to do? What about this one thing? So I think it's always helpful, like especially talk through even before you start, just because it's like gives whoever your interviewer is, if they're good and paying attention, the ability to kind of look at it and be like, is that the best answer?
Mhm.
Um, especially if they have to ask, like for me, I was like asking the same questions over and over again. You see patterns. You're just like, I've
Yeah.
seen this path. I know where you're going.
Mhm.
What is that where you want to go?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, I think also it's very important to just make the interviewer like you. I think people don't really think about their personality sometimes with interviews. Like you're so focused on answering these technical questions correctly that you forget that whoever's interviewing you like wants to work with someone that they like and that's personable. So I always think it's helpful to, smile, ask how their day is, little
yeah,
things like that.
yeah. I've probably forgotten to do that from time to time. Just due to stress, right? Like you're just so stressed. You're like, I don't remember how to write a for loop right now. So
Yeah.
smiling is kind of my last thing. But, yeah. Do you feel that the role of kind of an analytics engineer will kind of continue to grow? Is that kind of where you see it going in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think it bridges an important gap that currently exists between a lot of technical and business teams. I know I saw it a lot while I was working at Capital One. There's just kind of everything siloed, and I think an analytics engineer does a really good job at bringing those together because, I work directly with the engineering teams, but then also like the data analyst is my stakeholder. So you really get to see both sides of things,
Mm,
and bring questions that I think maybe neither side had thought about before. Yeah.
yeah. No, that makes sense in terms of like trying to bridge that gap. I think that's always the most difficult part, right? Like
Mhm.
it's that like parabola in between tech and business. It's just like if you can bridge that gap, that brings a lot of value to any business. But
Yeah.
there is some magic there.
Yeah. It's
Um,
hard. It's still definitely a struggle.
yeah, getting everyone speaking the same words, getting everyone to understand like what someone else is doing, getting tech people to understand what's actually valuable to the business is
Mhm.
all tricky.
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of tools, just like going back to that, like again, the first article I read from you was like about your preference for Prefect.
Mhm.
So why do you prefer Prefect, and then or why do you hate Airflow? Whichever one you want to speak to.
So I guess the biggest thing for me was honestly the UI. Because I come from, I guess, a marketing background and I also have a very creative side. I like pretty looking things, and Airflow just did not do it for me. I didn't think the user experience was very intuitive. It didn't really communicate what I wanted. And Prefect, it's very like easy to look and see exactly what's happening, what the dependencies are, what task is failing, and to me it just wasn't as easy to understand in Airflow. And Airflow just seemed like a lot more maintenance for what I wanted. I was
Mm,
in a time crunch too when I was setting it up, so I kind of wanted the easiest solution to set up and get things moving. And I feel like as the only person on the data team at the time, I didn't have the time to like dive into it and maintain it, and get the results that I wanted out of Airflow. And Prefect, they also have a great support community, which I didn't find with the Airflow team. And they were always there to answer my questions, which I definitely appreciated.
oh. I'm almost surprised in terms of the Airflow community. I feel like that's always one thing. I'm like, Airflow community is great because it's like bigger, but I mean, I guess that is an experience we can all have. But and Prefect, I imagine at this point is very interested in trying to get a larger community. So I'm sure they're putting a lot of effort
Mhm.
into growing it. Um, but I think that makes sense overall in terms of like just an easier solution to work with. I am seeing like I feel like more and more people kind of like push towards that. Did you look into Dagster at all, or was that just
Yeah, I did. I don't remember why I didn't go with Dagster. I just know that I liked Prefect better.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Another thing with Prefect is that they do have like already built out DBT and Fivetran tasks, which makes it even easier to integrate if you're already using those in your stack. Um,
mm,
so that was definitely a plus as well.
yeah? I think especially if you're using those DBT and Fivetran, then yes, I would definitely see a lot of benefits because I think that's something I haven't like connected it all together yet, but I've
Mhm.
always thought about like I think five all these pieces with Airflow sounds like an extra step I don't want to add, but
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So that's definitely interesting. I always get this question. I feel like, or I say always. I think I've gotten like 4 times on lives. So it's always like AWS versus GCP versus Azure. So I'm curious. Do you have a preference in terms of cloud providers when you're kind of setting up things?
I don't really have a preference. I kind of just go with what I know, which is AWS. That's what I was in a DevOps role my first year at Capital One, and we
Mm,
only used AWS. So that's kind of what I have the most experience in, what I was trained in. So I've just always gone for what I know.
nice. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like AWS is, I don't know, where a lot of people start. I think a lot of what I often tell people is like a lot of techish companies tend to use them. A lot of startups use them.
Mhm.
They are the biggest market by market share, and then Azure's second. So that's, I feel like it's usually more enterprisey. And then GCP, the biggest place or biggest solution I've ever used there is BigQuery, and everything else I'm like haven't ever spun up a cloud compute. So other than outside of like a tutorial,
Yeah.
but never in production. So
Yeah, we actually use Azure now, but I haven't had too much interaction with it. I guess everything I've done with it, I haven't really enjoyed. So
oh
I'm gonna
no,
stick with AWS.
is there anything in particular that you don't really enjoy? Is there like a specific tool or just the overall flow?
I feel like it's just the outdated UI again.
Uh,
Yeah.
yes, yes, it is. It is. I think like I always say like Power BI always feels like they just took Excel charts and then put them into Power BI. And I'm just
Yeah.
like Power BI can do a lot of cool things, but I just wish the charts were a little bit different.
Yeah. Some
I
people that doesn't bother, but for some reason it really gets to me. You just have all these beautiful tools nowadays that it's like I want to take advantage of them.
Yeah, yeah. Um, do you have any other like tools you consider beautiful? I'm just curious, like, and it can be outside of data. I'm just curious if like what other things fall in that beautiful range.
Um, so another tool that I really like that I wanted to implement at Winc, but we don't currently have the budget for it, but Caster, it's a data catalog tool. I think they're doing a really great job of automating data documentation. Um, and they have some cool features like connecting your definitions to Slack.
Oh,
So like you can actually import like all that tribal knowledge that goes into like a Slack thread talking about a specific data column. That was something that I thought was really cool. Another one that I like is Souffle, which is a data observability company.
hmm.
I think they also have a really nice product that's intuitive and easy to understand and read. And then some other products. I guess Canva. That's like what I use for my like newsletter and LinkedIn posts. I think they always do a great job.
I will have to support Canva. I think the game changed when I learned that Canva can do presentations, and I was like, I'm just using Canva for everything now. It's like thumbnails, presentations. It's like that's just the way to go. I think it's because it has, for me, it's like workflow state. It's like everything's kind of there. It's like it'll even kind of borderline search Google when you're like looking for an icon or an image, and so it just makes things really fluid. So
Yeah, it's really
um,
easy to use.
yeah, it's that and the Lucid chart, I think, has a similar feel. I don't know. Do you have a preference in terms of like more diagrammy things, like you're diagramming a workflow?
Not really. Yeah, I guess I pretty much use Canva for everything
Yeah,
design related.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd say there's a lot of things kind of going on and moving around, moving pieces kind of happening in the data space. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts in terms of like next 5 years. And I'm not gonna make it hard. I used to try to ask people 10 years, and they all looked at me weird. So 5 years, where do you kind of see? I feel like the data world going.
I feel like it's even hard to think about 5 years because things just move so fast that you never really know. But I feel like there's going to come a time where all these tools that we have now in the modern data stack consolidate into one. I feel like you're kind of already seeing that, like with DBT going into orchestration a little bit, Fivetran, like kind of going into transformations. Snowflake, I feel like, is trying to do everything too. So we're going to get to a point where there's, I guess, just these tools that take over the entire data stack rather than having these smaller ones intertwined. But I guess not with data itself. I was kind of just thinking more about career wise. I think just working in the data world is going to become a lot more accessible. I think people are finally starting to realize that you don't have to go to school or get a computer science degree to do anything in data, that you can learn from courses online and from people like us that have done it before, and have lots of free resources online. And I think that's going to be the cool thing, is that there's not going to be this educational barrier, hopefully down the line.
Yeah, actually, I think it was our like just our short comment thread where you said something about not having a non-traditional tech background. And I was like, I hear that a lot though. So at this point, what is a traditional tech background if everyone
Yeah.
always is like, oh, non-traditional tech background? So it does feel like a lot of people are kind of finding ways in. And even prior to this, like I've talked to a lot of people who maybe, maybe 20 years ago, that's like, oh, I had a degree and it was in something completely different. And now I work in tech.
Mhm.
So it's interesting seeing a lot of people shift in. So,
Yeah, I think
um,
it's awesome.
are there any terms you kind of currently hate kind of in the data space right now and that you kind of wish would go away?
I feel like there's so many buzzwords that keep popping up. I'm just like, why is there another one? Probably data activation is the one that I've been seeing more people talk about. And I just never really understood, because isn't all data meant to be used by the business and actionable? What's the point of having data if it's not going to be actionable in the first
Mm.
place? So that's one that I've been a little confused about. I think just trying to give something a name that's always existed.
Yeah, it is the curse of, I think, a lot of, you want to call them MDS tools, right? Because the ongoing joke with MDS is just like, oh, just take something from Informatica or
Mhm.
SAP and make it one module and make it a company, and
Yeah.
now you have to like sell it as a single piece. So
Mhm.
as you said, like there's kind of this natural consolidation kind of happening. So it's all kind of centering. Or the other
Mhm.
option is they all have to have a singular or standardized protocol that they can all talk to each other, and basically work as one.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we're just spending way too much time trying to make it all talk to each other, anyways.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. Those are my key questions, and now we do have some Q&A if you feel like answering some.
Sure.
All right, where did I see? Is it? Oh, this one. Okay, so how do responsibilities shift for an analytics engineer as you move up the ladder? Example, like what do senior and lead AEs do differently than more entry and mid level?
Yeah, this is a really good question. This is honestly something I'm trying to figure out with my own career. Like, what's the next step? I think it's easier in companies that have a large data team.
Mm.
There's literally only three of us on the data team, so I'm the only analytics engineer. So I guess I've always been the lead analytics engineer, but I think it really depends on the business. I've seen entire analytics engineering teams, though, where you have, the different rankings. You have the analytics engineer manager, you have the senior one, you have an entry level. I think it's pretty much the same as like a data engineer, the different levels. It just
Mm.
depends on the company and whether they have that role in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It is always interesting seeing what different companies define as like senior and mid. Um, at least in my perspective in terms of general things is like usually senior people are looking for bigger projects on their own and spearheading those projects on their own,
Mhm.
and driving that value by themselves versus like mid is probably given a big size project and running it by themselves, but maybe they didn't find it per se.
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
One of the benefits, I guess, of AE is that you're already interfacing with a lot of cross teams, so that's
Mhm.
kind of usually a benefit because I think that already like forces you to be a little more senior,
Yeah,
um, just
definitely.
by figuring out what do people need.
Yep.
Let's see. So obviously, someone's going to always ask, do you have any sense of salary expectations for analytics engineers?
I've found that it's the same as what I was seeing as a data engineer. But I mean, with remote companies now, I feel like they're kind of all blending to that same level. So at least with what I've experienced, it's comparable.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'd say it's got to be pretty close. I think from what I've seen most of the time. And I remember I did a video on it I think a while ago, and at best on average it was like lower than like maybe 5 or 10K, which at the amount that it was, it's like it's not a huge difference. I don't think it's going to
Mhm.
change your lifestyle.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so this one's more about I think tools. So do you think that it's essential to use DBT to be an analytics engineer? More just saying I feel that people are far too focused on tools rather than skills. So any thoughts on that specific
Yeah, I feel
question?
like DBT is essential just because, I mean, they're the ones that created the analytics engineer, and right now I feel like they're the only transformation tool that really exists that's, as big and as effective as DBT is for data modeling. Maybe that would change if there's a better competitor, but right now I feel like they've just built up a huge community. They're integrated with pretty much all the modern data stack tools. I mean, at the core of DBT is SQL. So, like, if you're skilled with SQL and you practice that, then I mean, that's the big thing. I think you can still get into analytics engineering without knowing DBT just because it's easy to learn if you already know SQL. But I definitely do think it's essential, at least with where the modern data stack is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's just hard to avoid, that's definitely a plus one for DBT in terms of tying a role to a tool. You're like, "Dang, that's
Yeah.
exactly where every company wants to be." I think I've actually joked to some companies, like, once your name is on a job description, I think you win, or at least you've won something. I don't know what you won, but so someone's transitioning from data engineer to analytics engineer. Do you feel like you continue to use Python in your AE role?
So I've only really used Python with my orchestration tool, which is Prefect, and it's really not anything too complex. So I haven't had to use Python. I think it definitely depends on what tool you're choosing to use. So I don't think it's necessary, but you can use it as much or as little as you want to.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine you can kind of slip it in there, but like even it's so working at Facebook, I feel like when most of the Python we use, even as data engineers, was often more frameworky and less codey because it was more like Airflow. So that's one of those things where like the more you go towards like this timing, basically just running stored or running like SQL at a certain time essentially or scheduled SQL queries, it's like how much Python do you need to actually wrap around that? It kind of continues to reduce. So someone was more wondering about how you sharpen your skills. So framing of this is she mentioned hackathon earlier, but I'm curious what she would say was the most useful resource that helped her sharpen her technical skills at the beginning.
So I don't know if I really had one major resource that I use. I think the biggest thing is actually doing real projects and like real practice questions. I think I definitely read a lot of books, took courses, but when it came down to actually learning, I think you only really learn those things when you apply them to an actual project. So, like, even when I was learning SQL, I would do tons of leak code questions because they were like real world business questions, a lot of them, that you could actually like think about specific metrics that you were calculating rather than just these like theoretical concepts. So getting involved with like, yeah, any kind of real time project. I actually signed up for a program too called Data Science Dream Job, which helped walk me through a lot of those projects and helped me put those skills to the test. And I think that was really helpful. But also, just like working every day on a real world problem is what's going to help you the most, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Do you have any project ideas that you usually like to share with people that they could try running or doing themselves?
I think I did like any Kaggle project. I think I did that Zillow one that
Mm,
literally everyone does. And I think also finding data sets that interest you. Even like Snowflake now has that marketplace where you can get all these
Yeah.
free data sets, which I didn't take advantage of. I didn't even know about that then, but I think that's really helpful now. Sorry, you can hear my dog. Can you
Yes, I
hear
can.
him
Yeah.
crying?
He needs attention. He needs love.
Yeah, here they are. They're very needy. But yeah, I think like Kaggle has good problems, and you can learn from other people on there too.
Yeah. No, I'm always curious, and I like that you brought up like the marketplace of data because I don't know when I first started I recall like having to like download like Microsoft SQL Server or Post or something similar and then find a data set, upload it. Every data set I think I always found always had a problem with it. Like
Yeah.
maybe that there was like commas in it or that it wasn't double quoted, and so then the data would go in wrong. And now it's just like just go to BigQuery and go to the Stack Overflow dataset or the GitHub dataset or the other dozen or Snowflake. They also have plenty, and
Mhm.
just play with those. So
Even
it's always
now
fun.
too, like a lot of the data stack tools like DBT is free, open source, Airbyte is free. Snowflake has a free trial, so you can create like a DBT project as an example to help you learn those different technologies. You can create your own Airbyte connector, and that'll help you get some of the hands-on experience.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So I don't know if you dug into this one. Well, this supposed to be versus, but basically, analytics engineer versus data engineer. What do you think like the job difference kind of is?
So I think analytics engineer is a lot of like data quality, so managing ingestion, making sure everything's good there, transforming the data, and then also like the orchestration, making sure the data is arriving at the time that you're looking for, and just like a lot of small little details, I guess, like setting standards for your data. I found like if you're familiar with DBT base models, like I've set up all of the standards there to make sure
Yeah.
um, our analyst was like looking at the data that she expected to look at, and they
Mm,
all had the same type of standards. Like time zones was also a big thing for us. Like all of our data was being casted in different time zones and even different data types, which was causing a lot of issues that nobody knew about. But I think a lot of times too, I think the transformation part is what really sets analytics engineers apart from data engineers. Is that you're creating these data sets so the business can directly use them and analysts can directly use them rather than just looking at the source data.
yeah. Yeah. I think that's definitely been an interesting push, like making data right, like the whole data as a product versus just putting out data sets. Like when you say underscore date or underscore timestamp, it means something, right? Like it's not just like
Mhm.
this date is whatever YYY dash DD dash MM. That one's dash or MM dash DD dash YYYY, and then you're like how do I join this? Now I got to parse this and
Mhm.
making everyone do extra work. Seems like a small difference, but makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, so like just the idea of standards, only because it's funny to me. I was in Salt Lake City the other week, and uh, I was like walking down some stairs, and it was probably like maybe 6 stairs, and I realized every stair was a different height. Like some were short, some were tall, and then you're like, ah, this is why they've made codes and standards because someone's going to break their neck
Yeah.
going down these stairs. So I'm kind of like maybe that's where we're going with data. We're like kind of setting these standards, and then hopefully in the future people will benefit from not like querying wrong or writing bad
Mhm.
queries. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. If you have a business team that's more hands-on too, which ours was before we had a specified data team, they don't even think about these things and they're querying the data expecting that it's all perfect just the way it is. And
Mm,
you're creating all these actionable things like marketing campaigns based off of data that could be wrong because you don't realize these small little details.
yeah, yeah. So as far as like getting a job, wait, this is one I wanted to pull up. How far in depth? Oh no, hold on. Let me. Oh, this one. Sorry. We'll go to the other one, but I want to pull this one first. So how would you recommend searching for an analytics engineering job other than job boards? Are there any resources that you know of?
It's a good question. So I definitely use LinkedIn a lot, which is the obvious answer. I think,
Some very happy dogs.
yeah, they're very loud dogs too. I think subscribing to a lot of newsletters. I don't personally include jobs in my newsletter, but I think there's one called, I think it's just the Modern Data Stack or something that does
Mm,
list some analytics engineering jobs at the bottom. Or I always look at like Built in NYC, Built in LA. I think they always have good tech jobs, not specific for analytics engineering. But another thing I guess to look out for is that an analytics engineer job might not be listed as that. It might be listed as a data engineer or a data
mm,
analyst. I think you really have to read the job descriptions. Usually, if you see a job that has like DBT in the description, I feel like it's probably more analytics engineering, but it really depends on the company. Some companies may try to combine the two roles. Um,
mm.
yeah, it's hard because it's just really like starting, and there's not a ton of roles out there with that specific title.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely kind of a little more, I guess, just more just recent. And I actually used to describe like when people were saying like, "What's a data engineer?" And I'm like, "Well, there's kind of a spectrum, right? Like there's some that are
Yeah.
more like analytical and businessy, and they're writing again a lot of SQL queries and doing transformers. And then there's a lot that like maybe parse logs directly and write streaming, pipelines and things of that nature. So when the title analytics engineer kind of came out, I was like, yeah, okay, we can split it. That's fine.
Yeah.
I kind of used to describe it this way, anyways. So it's kind of interesting seeing someone define it a little more.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Okay. Let's see. So in terms of this one, so how far in depth are you looking at data as an analytics engineer? How does that look different than like a data analyst? So maybe a better way of putting this is like data analyst versus analytics engineer. Um,
Yeah. So I think analysts focus more on like one-off reports that directly relate to the business. So the more granular a report or dashboard, that's usually going to be the job of a data analyst. But the analytics engineer is creating data models that can constantly be reused from that by that data analyst. So they're more broad, but still detailed enough where you have to do transformations and piecing together different data sets. So you can look at the analytics engineer as creating data sets to make the data analyst jobs easier so they can then reference those like in their more granular reports and dashboards.
yeah, yeah. I think the other way like if you were to ask like an analyst to do kind of AE style work, what often I feel like ends up happening is they'll build a set of models that like go directly to a single use case, which
Mhm.
makes sense. Like it's one of those things where it's like that makes sense. Like, what did you want them to do? Their job was literally to answer like one question at the moment. They're not looking to be like this broad. Let's develop a broad layer of data that everyone can use. It's like how can I make this data for this one thing?
Yes.
So yeah, that's it's always an interesting result when you kind of ask for that.
Mhm.
Let's see. I feel like you might have answered this already, but if you feel like answering this again, what made you leave your first job for analytics engineering?
Yeah, so I just wasn't I wanted more business exposure. I feel like I was being told what to do rather than deciding what to do and how to solve certain problems.
Mm,
So analytics engineering gave me a lot more of that business exposure that I was looking for. So interacting with like marketing, growth, even finance teams, more serving the data analyst. And yeah, it was just a lot more creativity, I guess. And I specifically too, like going from a large corporate company to a startup is a lot different. And I think that's also for reason for like more creativity,
mm,
and you really can be the one to make decisions and decide what tools to implement, and how you want to move the data culture, I guess, going forward.
Yeah, that's got to be, I think, a cool point of things where you're like, and this is why, if you like anyone out there, if you prefer driving things yourself, yeah, go work for a startup or something smaller, because
Yeah.
otherwise it's usually like the decisions on what tool you use is made by a VP whose friend works at a company, and since they're both friends, they just pick that tool.
Yeah.
That's the way this world works. Yeah. So, all right. So, Coalesce, are you going? And do you feel like it's a great place to meet other AEs?
No, I'm unfortunately not. I'll be in Greece the 2
Oh,
weeks before, so
unfortunately.
yeah. Too much traveling for me, but I'll be attending the virtual sessions. But yeah, I definitely think it would be a good place to network. Also, if you're looking for a new role, that's probably a great place to talk to people that are hiring for other analytics engineers.
Yeah. Yeah. As I said, unfortunately. But but yeah, I've also just personally, I've just been conferenced out. Like I'm just like, I've gone to like 2 or 3 this year. That's that's enough.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Did you do Databricks or Snowflake?
I went to Snowflake, yeah.
Nice. Did you manage to avoid uh the I don't know, everyone seemed to get sick afterwards.
Yeah, I was fine, luckily. I was sick the month before, so
Ah, good. Yeah, I just saw it on everyone's Twitter for some reason. I was like,
yeah.
"Oh, how did I miss this?" Um, all right, so what would you say was the biggest initial challenge when moving into analytics engineering?
I think it was honestly thinking in a more like data analyst mindset. I wanted that business exposure, but because I hadn't had it, I didn't quite know how to connect the dots yet between the data I was looking at and using it to serve the business. So I think that was probably the hardest hump, which is makes it really important to have a good manager. My manager was really great at mentoring me through that and like showing me how I should be thinking about things. Like he's really the one that showed me how to validate data the correct way, and that was super helpful. So definitely look for a good manager when you're doing a career transition like that.
Yes, yeah, making sure you have someone that will fight for you and look for opportunities. I think definitely can. It changes your whole trajectory, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's very important. Actually, someone referenced this earlier, and I lost that question, but someone was asking about data validation, and they just wanted to know, like, what do you mean when you say data validation?
Just like doing simple counts, looking for null values, comparing your data models back to the base tables that you're using, checking for duplicates, making sure a lot of columns will have like some kind of built-in logic to it. So making sure that logic actually makes sense and is working the right way, things like that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes it like I always like some of those I call like aggregate checks, like making sure that after you do a transform, that the numbers still add up to essentially the numbers they should have added up to. They didn't duplicate or do anything weird, which they definitely can do.
Mhm.
Um, do you have any favorite Slack groups for analytics engineers?
Probably the DBT one.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I feel like that's the main one. I'm not too active in any of the Slack groups, but usually active when I have a problem. But
I I assume that's most of us. Yeah, some of us
yeah,
are really good at answering questions. Others are just like, just help. Can you answer the
yeah.
question? Um, so just following up on, I think, data analyst kind of question, are you expected to deliver insights as an AE, or just pave the way for DAs to kind of get those insights?
I would say more so paving the way.
Yeah.
I think insights in terms of potential data quality issues, yes, but insights for the business, you're just really helping out the data analyst who then does those.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, this is always interesting because I always say with like DE, it's hard to kind of like there's not too many entry positions. So I'm curious on the AE side, do you feel like you see a lot of entry level positions in that kind of space?
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like anyone can do it, but also, I mean, I did have a data engineering background, so I feel like because analytics engineering is so revolved around SQL and then specific tools, I think it's one of the more approachable careers. If you have like a lot of hands-on project and you've really um, worked with those specific tools and practice with those specific tools, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to get an entry level role, but I feel like you probably really have to sell yourself and it has to be the right company to
Yeah,
take a chance on you.
yeah, yeah. But I'm glad that I do feel like I'm trying to think if I've seen any AEs that are just more junior role. I feel like because you have like this system, you almost have this like system design necessity in it, like because you have to think about so many pieces that it can be challenging if like you don't at least have a senior person above you to kind of help you as well. So,
I think a
um,
lot of companies too, at least smaller ones, kind of want you to have some data engineering experience to help out with certain things and that kind of fit under that role as well.
yeah. Let's see, where's this? Uh, Regarding remote work policies. I'm just like looking at questions. Uh, Here, let's see. Do you feel like so are AEs basically expected to have reporting business knowledge, such as like products, processes, and reporting metrics?
Yeah, you definitely have to know the main business metrics because a lot of the times the models that you're building, you are going to be calculating those things. And when you're creating those models, you want to have those end metrics in mind. If they're not in the model, then the data analyst is probably going to be using those as well. So you have to understand a lot of how the business runs because you're creating the models that the business is going to use.
Yeah, and and just adding to like, I'd also say like for like as you get like up in your career, for everyone else out there, it's like it's it's generally like the more you can kind of connect your work to business models, like even as a data engineer, the better or the business metrics because if you can't connect your stuff to what the business is doing, it's really hard to justify why you're valuable. So it's hard. I think it's even harder for data engineers because it's like another level removed. But it's definitely like the more you can attach it to those results, the better because that's how promotions happen.
Yeah, I
It's like, oh, like
definitely agree. With data engineers, I feel like it was hard to see like why you were doing things a lot of the times and like what the end result was supposed to be.
yeah. So this is kind of like BI analyst. Like, do you feel like that's an easy transition to an AE role?
I think so. I think you have the SQL skills and you have the business knowledge, which are two big things that you can heavily lean on. You just need to learn more of the specific tools and some data engineering concepts, but I think it's definitely doable.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it should be an easy shift. Um, do you perform? I mean, I guess just in your job, like A/B tests and experimentation on results.
I personally don't. Our data analyst does that.
Nice, nice. That's do you feel like there's like kind of been this shift like where like like I feel like A/B test used to be a kind of this data science space, but like maybe through tooling, it's kind of shifted into this like product analyst space. Do you think that's kind of
Hmm.
what you're seeing a lot?
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely, I think so.
Yeah. All right. So in terms of cross-team collaboration, what does the cross-team collaboration typically look like? Like, do the BA typically come to you for specific solutions? Do you have weekly stand-ups? Yeah, what's your general workflow? I guess could be another way of phrasing that.
Yeah, right now, I'm really working on building a lot of foundational things with our data stack. So I don't have too much stakeholder interaction. But if we're like rebuilding a model or building a new one entirely, I'll work pretty closely with our data analyst. I do work with like some stakeholders, but mainly that's for like data quality issues if they have a Google sheet that they haven't updated or like I get a freshness alert on something. But mainly because the data analyst is the one that's going to be using the data sets that I'm producing, I talk to her for what her specific needs are.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of companies, have you seen specific types of companies hire AEs?
I believe Spotify I've seen with analytics engineering roles, DBT, obviously. I believe Audible was just building out like a lot of analytics
Mm,
engineering teams. I think those are the main ones I've seen.
yeah,
GoPuff, maybe. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I think like you brought this up earlier. There's a lot of companies that like sometimes don't define their
Mm,
role as analytics engineer, but it kind of is. I've seen again some people say that some Facebook DEs are kind of in that space just because of how the tooling they use. So they might not use DBT, but because
mm,
they kind of do a lot of scheduled queries, that can kind of sometimes fit in a similar role, especially the higher like the closer you kind of get, or like the farther you get away from like the application
mm.
itself. So it can also just be obfuscated by not clear definitions. All right. So why did you choose essentially Winc?
The company culture really was what I was looking for. I wanted something remote because I love to travel. I travel
Mm,
around a lot. Um, and Winc was just I really liked the people that I interviewed with. I was the first hire besides like our data lead on the team, and he was like really passionate about what he was doing. And we were completely rebuilding the data stack and the data models that we had from scratch.
mm,
So it was really an opportunity for me to learn hands on and kind of do everything myself, which was exciting to me. Like, obviously, with the guidance of my manager who had a lot to teach me. So, I guess three main reasons: the company culture. My like big thing is that I did not want to be sitting on meetings all day. That was a huge pain point of mine at Capital One. I just felt like I was always in meetings that I didn't have to be in. So that was something I was really looking for. So company culture, the people that you work with, and then just like lots of learning opportunities.
yeah, that's those will all be I think beneficial, especially the traveling with going to Greece. Are you gonna be working there, or is this completely a vacation?
No, this is a vacation. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm terrible at doing that, but good. um, So, do you build any dashboards or use kind of any of these tools in the role of AE?
I did build a few dashboards before we had our data analyst, but now I don't build any.
Yeah, that's that's got to. It's nice to focus. I feel like I've always had to kind of dabble in everything, so it's probably
Mhm.
nice to get some focus. Um, okay, I'm curious on this. Just if you've looked this up, what are your thoughts on headless BI?
So headless BI is when everything's done within the tool, right?
I'm gonna look it up to make sure I give you the right definition because I've seen too many. Headless BI is an analytical architecture that decoupled the analytics backend from the presentation layer. Any data tools can access headless BI platform and consume metrics via an open API. Good data is an example. I honestly have not had to touch it, so
Yeah.
if you don't
I
have an opinion, I don't either because I've not had to work with them.
Yeah,
Um,
me neither. I don't know.
and
It doesn't seem like something that would be beneficial. I know like when I joined Wink, my our big thing was that we're trying to move everything off of like all of the all-in-one platforms, which just became a huge mess, tons of tech
mm,
debt, awful problem to fix that we're still like trying to slowly get out of. So if it's anything similar to that, then I would say steer clear of that.
what were you guys using before?
Domo.
Oh, interesting. You're
Yeah,
one of the people who uses that. I always wondered who used it because they
yeah.
apparently do well in sales, and I'm just like, who buys Domo? I just
Yeah.
don't know. I've never run into it. Um,
Yeah, Winc was using it with some contractors before, like hiring a full data team, and it just has created a big mess.
yeah, I could probably, I can see that. I just remember, I think it was like 2014, reading articles where it was like Domo was going to take down Tableau, and then at a certain point, I stopped seeing articles about Domo, and I was like, it's not around anymore, right? But I've heard it referenced a few more times, I think in the last month or two. I'm like, okay, so they're somewhere being used
Yeah.
by someone. Um, yeah, let's see. Would you recommend limiting your first job as a data engineer or analyst to your own country? I guess this would be like, yeah, like working locally or maybe working like externally somewhere.
I mean, I don't think it really matters as long as you don't mind working those hours, and it works with your lifestyle. If the company is right for you, I mean, working remotely now, you can pretty much work anywhere with any company you want. So if
Yeah,
like your time zones match up, then why not?
yeah, that makes sense. Try and go through, see if there's any other question. Okay, so this one, because I feel like the certificate questions come up all the time, so I'm curious on your just opinion on certificates. So, do you feel like the Google professional certificate or DBT one? Do you think that's necessary when applying to jobs?
No, I don't think so at all. I haven't really found them to be useful.
Yeah,
Um, I think I have like one Google one and then the AWS one, but honestly, I don't think it necessarily helps with real life scenarios. I think you're much more better off just trying a project with that tool and actually having a project to show for it.
yeah. I've always like my general advice to most people out there is like they can be helpful if you've already worked with the tool because they fill in any gaps that maybe you didn't know and you have some context to kind of connect it to. But just taking it plain without I just don't feel like it sticks as well. And like I think, like you said, like you're not going to get a project in the end, and it's just a lot of high level information that doesn't get connected
Yeah.
as well. It's kind of how I feel about MBAs. It's like if you've got 10 years of experience or 5 years of experience, maybe an MBA is useful. But if you are just out of college, it's hard to like connect it to real life things you've done. So I don't think it provides the same level of insight
Yeah,
later on.
I
But
agree. I am a little interested to take the DBT certification, just because I'm interested in what the questions say, and I feel like I would learn new things, kind of like what you were saying, because I'm already familiar with DBT.
yeah, yeah, it's just those little things. You're like, oh, I was doing it this way, and okay,
Yeah,
this might be a better way. So it's those little workarounds that you might have done that maybe don't need to happen, or maybe that you figure out like, yep, nope, that's the best way to do whatever this one problem is. So yeah,
yeah, definitely
um,
don't prioritize it going into a new role. Look at it as a way to enhance what you already know.
yeah. I'm curious, like especially since Spark is just becoming more popular and DBT is looking at adding in Python. What role do you feel like Apache Spark will kind of play for AEs?
Honestly, I don't think it will really be relevant at all. I haven't had any need for it in what I'm doing. I feel like the modern data stack tools kind of cover the use cases.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like Spark and like things like Spark, Flink, and similar uh, solutions like that are great when you have the right amount of data. That like I mean like big enough data that you need to be processing at a very different level. But yeah, you can get away with a lot, or you have the use cases, I guess, like more ML. Um, but for most people, especially if you're more traditional BI analytics style company, SQL will take you very far. So yeah. Um, let's see. So this person's asking about the recession. I think I just accidentally misspelled it. But so basically, with the current recession happening, do you think this affects data analytics roles or internships for next year?
Yeah, I mean everything I think is affected.
Yeah,
um, yeah, I think the best thing you can do is just keep learning, like doing projects on your own, try and make yourself stand out.
Yeah, and even like a lot of the big tech companies at this point, I think some have either cut their internship programs, or if they still have it, maybe they've cut the like hiring part of it. Like there's like we're just not hiring any interns. We're just gonna maybe have an internship. So there will probably be a little bit of an impact. I think generally if you're more senior and you're already working in a company, especially if it's like one of those like most companies, it's like you're the only data person or there's like just you and
Mhm.
another person, you're usually pretty safe. Um, I'm not going to say you're guaranteed, but at a lot of companies I know, they're like, yeah, I'm the only data engineer. I'm like, I mean, your company's 1,000 people. All right, you're not getting fired. Like that would be a terrible idea for someone to do. But yeah, let's see. So this one's kind of learning new things. How often are you studying to develop your technical skills outside of work? Basically, and then there's some more on that in terms of you can answer that question, then maybe we can get to the second one.
Honestly, I feel like if you have a good role, you don't have to be studying outside of your job. Your job should be challenging you
Mhm.
enough to learn new things at work. That's kind of what I was lacking at my old role. And now, like with Winc, I feel like I'm constantly learning something new where I don't have to do that. Yeah, burnout and career progression. I think a lot of people too, they don't like they're not upfront, I guess, with their boundaries. I think that's something that I did when I joined Winc is that I made it very clear, like I want to be able to go for a random walk in the middle of the day or do my workouts in the morning. And setting those boundaries up front, I think gives you room to succeed in your career and be productive without feeling like you have to prove something. And I don't think you have to constantly be working all like before 9 o'clock and after 5 to, do a good job. I think that's like something with our generation that we've been misled. I'm a huge believer in balance, and I think what you do outside of work only helps you do better while you're doing your job.
Yeah, yeah. I will admit finding that balance is hard for me, but I can definitely I definitely try. But I also kind of agree. Like I think again back at Facebook, 2 and 3 between 2 and 3 o'clock, I would always just go work out because one, if you waited till 5, the gym was
Mhm.
packed. So I was just like, I'm not going to the gym at 5. And two, it was kind of a nice break in the day, right? Like you had lunch, you kind of avoid the 2 o'clock crash. It's just a good like midday, like let's kind of get charged up again. And then it also gives me an excuse to stay an extra hour for dinner because they make dinner wait at 6. So yeah. Well, Madison, I don't want to keep you all night, and questions have kind of slowed down. So I don't know. Do you have any other questions for me before we kind of sign off and go off?
I guess what piqued your interest in analytics engineering and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, like I think for me, I think why it kind of interests me is like one again, I've kind of always explained this kind of split between data engineering. There's kind of uh, both personas where you see people who very much just like lean heavily towards the engineering side of
Mhm.
data engineering, where they love building things, and then you see people that are more connected to the business side, where they're again writing tons of SQL queries, building data sets, things of that nature. Also, just the fact that like it kind of is this interesting bridge in terms of both tools and like business knowledge um, for business and tech. So I think that's what interests me. I think going forward, I think we're figuring out the process part more. I think that's the current kind of gap. There's a ton of tools, maybe too many tools, and figuring out the consolidation of that, but also figuring out how to make sure we're managing it all correctly. I think is where we're kind of going next. It's like the last 3 5 5 years, a lot of these tools came around. The next 3 to 5 years, we're going to kind of like start picking and choosing and delineating what a clear process is for successful AE orgs. So I think that's kind of where I see it going.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, if no one else has anything else, I'm going to hit end broadcast, and then I will see you guys next week.